Buddhism is one of the pieces of Vietnamese Buddhism. It's not currently being taught here as far as I know, and the only monk that I knew very well at all was Tri Ratnapriya, who followed it closely. Within the Vietnamese tradition, we're kind of an amalgamation of, we've got a little bit of Theravada, quite a bit of general Mahayana with some Zen influences, and then the Pure Land rose through. So what is the Pure Land? Well, let me start by saying how it came about. The Pure Land is a practice that sort of came out of general Mahayana beliefs. It's not something that shows up in Theravada except just in general Buddhist ideas. It changed within the Mahayana because it got attached to the Bodhisattva ideal, which is the thought that you will, we tend to translate in English as save others, which is a peculiarly Christian way of saying a Buddhist concept. But what you do in the Bodhisattva tradition is that everyone achieves enlightenment before you take the final step of enlightenment. So most people, when you first encounter it, you think, well, what, that means I can't be enlightened until other people are? Yes and no, because you have to achieve some sort of understanding before you can help others, before you can help guide others. But what the trick is, then you get back into ancient Indian philosophy, which was, life is horrible, I keep getting reborn, I know I keep getting reborn, this has got to be what this is, I'd like to step off the wheel. That's not what Buddhism is about, but that's what it came out of. And so the thought is that when you achieve final enlightenment, and what they say, the Buddha's nirvana, or his parinirvana, when he died, he didn't come back. Now, my personal interpretation of that is a little different than mainstream Buddhism, or at least is how it's couched today, because I think he came back because he is each of us. We are all Buddhas. I don't think he's gone until no one remembers him, and that gets us into the Pure Land. Because how the Pure Land came about, the concept of it was, well, apparently it was easy to become enlightened when the Buddha was around. He achieved by his own power, he achieved enlightenment. He understood all. And when he was enlightened, he said, I am enlightened and all the world is enlightened. So that's where I get that we're all the Buddha. But when he said that, the thought is that then his teachings were in the world, and he was in the world, and many people became arahants. They became enlightened. And one of the ways that we defined arahant is, Buddha means enlightened one. Arahant means enlightened one. The only difference was that the Buddha was the big guy. The other guys were important too. And I think that throughout the ages there have been arahants. We call them arahants. In China they've identified all these arahants. They have, if you go to the caves, there are many, many statues and many pictures of all these arahants. And the thought is that during the Buddha's time and after his death for a while, it was easy to become enlightened through your own efforts because the Dharma was in the world and it was clear. Then there came a period of time that it got kind of messy. And I think what we got into here was sectarianism, that people started being concerned that my Buddhism's better than your Buddhism. And you're not interpreting that right. He may have said that, but he didn't mean that. And, well, no, he didn't say that because my school, my scripture says this. So then you went through a period where you could sort of achieve enlightenment through your own efforts. And then they hit the period where we are right now. So there's 3 periods of time after the Buddha. And the third period is in Japan, they call it Mappo. And it's a period of time, come on in. It's a period of time when if you take Mappo at its face value, we're all doomed. You cannot achieve enlightenment under your own power. At some point, the Buddha and his teachings will go completely out of mind. And the good part about Mappo is one of the Buddhist truths is that everything changes. Eventually, the next Buddha will arrive. Maitreya is just waiting in the wings for everyone to forget about him. That's not going to happen for a while because we're sitting here and I'm talking about him. So, by any way of looking at it, we're technically in the Mappo period. The Buddhists who, people used to come to the Buddha and they used to say, how did the world begin? How did the universe begin? And he would say, that's not important. What's important is the truth of suffering, the ending of suffering. But we're humans. We want to understand. So we keep saying, so what happened before? So Buddhists kept saying, so what happens with the teachings? And so at some point this doctrine came up that 500 years after the Buddha, or maybe it was 1,000, depending on how you translate it or who was keeping the records, the Buddhists went from the Buddhist teachings are alive in the world and they're the pure teachings, and it's easy to become enlightened with your own power. And then 500 years later, well, it's not so easy, but you can still do it. And then Mappo came along, either 500 or 1,000 years later. So anyway you look at it, 2,500 years plus, we're in the third period. We're doomed. So the Buddhists looked at the different sutras and suttas that were out there, and they said, there are these bodhisattva creatures that are helping everyone, these entities. And there's something else that appears into the Mahayana called the celestial Buddhas, or the Dhyani Buddhas. Now, although we know a lot about their past lives because of the sutras, my understanding is that these celestial Buddhas did not exist in our world in our time. Maybe in some sort of Star Trek universe there were celestial Buddhas. But one of these is the major Pureland Buddha, which is Amitabha, was his original Sanskrit name. And if you want to see what he looks like, I've heard many arguments in this very room of, so is that, Shakyamuni, or is that Amitabha? And you can argue back and forth on the iconography. He fits both categories. But typically he's of the Gandhara school with a lot of Chinese on top of it. And the whole idea of Amitabha came out of the Gandhara school. Now, what was the Gandhara school? Gandhara was a period of time, Gandhara was located in Pakistan. And it was a period of time when the Mahayana was flourishing. And the idea that there was other power came in, which is something that wasn't around before. Self-power was that you could, through your own efforts and your understanding of the Dharma, you could achieve enlightenment. Other power was that there's someone that you could pray to or bring in on your behalf. Almost a deity, except that in Buddhism, you can ask deities for help, but ultimately, they die and go on to their next life. So it's not all that helpful. We don't deny gods, but we don't necessarily solicit them. And if you do solicit them, it's fine. I'm not saying, stay on the good side of gods. They have a lot of powers. But the whole bodhisattva came in, and along with that came these celestial Buddhas, which were big, huge metaphors for Buddhist truths. And one of them, Amitabha, which means endless or limitless light. This backstory on him is that we know a bunch of his different lives, and at that one point in a prior life, he looked around and saw these people having all these horrible times, and he said, I will create, in another life, I will create a Pure Land. I will create a world, a place, a state of being where it's easy to practice. Life is too hard. And you and I know how hard it is to sit down, if you're meditation people, to sit down on the mat, once a day like you've promised yourself or whatever. imagine that you're trying to actually live Buddhism 24/7. It's so hard. Which is one of the reasons why we have monks and nuns, because it's easier if you're a monk or a nun. It really is. I think the hardest form of Buddhism is to be a layperson. Because you have all these things that you're being told, some of which was aimed at monks and nuns. And you're trying to live them because for me, I know they're true. But, lots of people know they shouldn't cheat on their taxes or roll through stop signs. And this is so much more important than those. So we've got Amitabha, who made this vow that there would be a Pure Land. So how do we know about Amitabha? There were a number of, and this is where I feel like I walked in and saw this camera this morning and went, oh, I should have practiced more. So I brought my cheat sheet. There are different sutras that talk about Amitabha and talk about the Pure Land and talk about Pure Land ideas. And one of the major ones, so when I say Pure Land Buddhism, there's actually two things that are defined by that, depending on how you capitalize and punctuate it. There's Pure Land Buddhism, which is the belief that there is a Buddha named Amitabha, or various other names by your culture or country, who has created a field where it's easy to practice and where the Dharma is still pure, even though we're living in Mappo. And that's a general Mahayana Buddhist belief. And you'll find portions of that in almost all of the Mahayana schools. Some of it's been cut out of some of the Zen schools, where they say, well, that's a little too much like religion and God for us. We're not going to do that. But you come to a Vietnamese temple, it's all over the place. If you heard Nam and me out in the back greeting each other, we said Ayida Phat, which is the Vietnamese name for Amitabha. And it's shorthand for our saying Namo Ayida Phat. And you'll hear Namo here. Namo is from Pali Sanskrit, and it's often translated in English as hail to, or I take refuge in. One of my teacher, Tayan Zhao's students, was a Sanskrit scholar, and he said, no, what it actually means is he is called. So he is called Ayida Phat, or Amitabha. And it's more than it sounds like to us, he is called. That's like Mr. Amitabha. It's more than that. There's a depth to it. So when we greet each other and say Ayida Phat, we're saying, that there is a Buddha that created a Pure Land. And it comes to us through, there were over 290 texts in the Chinese Tripitaka, which is the schools of Buddhist texts in the Mahayana. And most of these are within, the Pure Land influences come to us strongly from something called the Lotus Sutra. And the important thing about the Lotus Sutra with regard to Pure Land is that all people have the potential for enlightenment. Doesn't matter if you're the son of a king, doesn't matter if you've been a good person or a bad person. Hitler has a potential for enlightenment. All of that is contained within that. It is one of the interesting things about Pure Land as it's practiced today. Merit doesn't count. Now, what is merit? Merit is when you do good deeds and they accrue on the good side of the chart. Actually, what good deeds do is they reinforce more good deeds. So it's not so much that they're accruing a tallying sheet over there. It's just it's training you to do more of the things that are beneficial or skillful for you. But there's a part of Pure Land now is doing things for merit, because there's a belief that you can pass merit on to your family. It's a good thought. It's a good thought that when you're doing good deeds, your family will see that and your family will do good deeds. That's how you're passing on merit. There's nothing wrong with doing something good for making donations or taking care of someone or going against your baser urges to go through that stop sign. So there's an ability within each person. It's intrinsic. It's built into us. There is no duality about it. Enlightenment is there. It is possible. And that gave hope that became the Pureland schools. Now, probably the only one of these sutras that you'll be familiar with, except for the monks here, are the Lotus Sutra and some of the Prajnaparamita literature, which there's one of the chants in our chant book that deals with that, the Heart Sutra. That some of that has Pure Land aspects to it. But within Pure Land is in a general Mahayana school. There are 3 major sutras, and this is what I needed my cheat sheet for, because although I've glanced at 2 of them, they're not something that I do as part of my regular practice. One is called the Amitabha Sutra, and it was originally in a form of Sanskrit. They believe that it's dated around 100 Common Era, and it came out of the Gandhara, Pakistan area and went into China. Then we have the Infinite Life Sutra. Now, the interesting thing about Amitabha, and scholars are unsure at this point whether Amitabha was the first or whether this other Buddha called Amitayus was the first. At some point, the 2 of them got blended together. Amitaya means infinite life. Amitabha means infinite light. And both of them are celestial Buddhas. Probably didn't exist in our life, our world. And the Amitabha Sutra introduces the idea of Amitabha and his vows. The Amitayus Sutra focuses more on faith, on Shraddha, and that faith is the important practice. And we'll get into the practices in just a moment. And then the third sutra within this school is called the Amitayus Meditation Sutra. And the interesting thing about this one is that it looks to scholars like it was originally written in Chinese. It didn't come out of Gandhara. It was retro-translated into Sanskrit. At least that's what it looks like to them. And this one gives the directions on how to reach the Pure Land. The other ones talk about the Pure Land, talk about the practices, but it's not, do ABC. So what are the practices? And who practices this? Well, this is principally in Southeast Asia. That's where the influence came. When the Buddhism that we're looking at came out of China, then they're familiar with Pure Land. So we've got China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. There's a practice of it in Tibet, which is quite a bit different from the other East Asian, Vietnam, of course. But it still is a Pure Land practice. So what's the first practice of Pure Land Buddhism? And this is the one that I know that Venerable Triratnapriya followed, because he and I had talked about it. We call it in English the Nyanfo, which basically means just the repetition of the name. Namo Yida Fa, Namo Yida Fa, Namo Yida Fa. You'll often, if you go onto YouTube and look for a version of this, it's almost always singing. Very beautiful, very repetitious. It's a form of meditation. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. One of them is just like meditation, where essentially your mind empties. And when you say each of the lines, each of the repetitions, you already empty your mind in between. Whatever comes up, let it go, then you say it again. This one's hard to do if you're in a group, because everybody's emptying their minds at different times. This is one that you can do on your own. And you can say it out loud, or you can say it silently. It's something that you can do on the bus. The other version of it is to throw yourself into the chanting. This is, for me, it feels similar to what the Koreans do, when they do their chanting, and some of the Japanese schools, they throw themselves completely into their chanting. It's how you get the deep chanting in Vietnamese. It goes, rah! They're so much devotion goes into the chanting, which is perfect for Pure Land because it's essentially a devotional practice. The belief is that if you invoke the name of Amida, Amida is the Japanese way of saying it, no matter how you say it, if you say it with a completely true, trusting heart, with a pure heart, his vow will be invoked. And I used to say, next stop is the Pure Land, and from there it's easy to step into enlightenment. So that's one. Just say the name. Pick one, or pick all the different versions. Omitofo is Chinese. Look it up on Wikipedia. They've got all sorts of them there. Just say it in a way that's comfortable to you. Now, one of the entrances to this is the second main practice of Pure Land, which is visualization, where you say, pick a picture of Amitabha. Now, any time you see three Buddhas together in a triptych, almost always the middle one will be Amitabha. So if you're ever curious, okay, so how do I picture him? This guy over here, Amitabha.
Yeah.
This guy, I was just looking at him over you, Amitabha. You picture him, close your eyes until you can create the Buddha behind your eyes. Now, Venerable Tianan, this was one of his practices. Taiyan Giáo talked at great length with me about Tianan talking about his practice of visualization, and that he would do it with his eyes open. He could create the Buddha there in front of him. I'm not real good at visualization. I've tried. I like chanting better. But for many people, this is an entrance. If your mind is too busy and chanting doesn't work for you right off the top, try visualization. A lot of people, that's how they get into this, is that they pick a picture of Amitabha that works for you and create him. I can do that with Kuan Yin, not so much with Amitabha. I've known Kuan Yin for a long time. She and I are buds. Except when she's a he, and then we're different kind of buds. But, sorry, the camera got me on that one. So there's that practice of visualization. And then the third practice, which is another one that Andrew Triratnapriya did, which is the scholarship. It's where you chant the sutra. And in that one, you can either chant the sutra simply for the sounds. It effectually becomes a mantra or a dhyani, a dharini. There is a dharani that's called the Amitabha dharani. It's the dharani for rebirth in the Pure Land. It's longer than just Namo Yida Fat. Not real long, but you can say that one, either attaching to the words what they mean or just doing the sound. And all of these are invoking the pure vows of Amitabha, that you have a pure heart and a pure faith. And that you are not attached to being reborn in the Pure Land. That's one of the keys. It's like Zen. When you become attached to enlightenment, when you get a moment of, oh, that was interesting, you've lost it. At the moment where you're chanting for enlightenment, it's good that you do it. It's not a bad thing to do. But at some point you transcend that. Or at least that's what those that have passed on have said to us. Now, the other form of Pure Land school are the sectarian schools that were founded in Japan. When Pure Land Buddhism hit Japan, there were people that looked at the state of Buddhism and looked at the state of the world, and they said, we are in Mappo, we're in the third period. And something has to be done, and they were reformers. And for them, the Pureland School was the thing. That's what worked for them. And what they did was they made this essentially a lay practice, because it doesn't matter if you're a prince, doesn't matter if you're a king, doesn't matter if you're a monk or a nun, everyone can do this practice. And Pureland in its lay form is one of the largest schools of Buddhism because it's spread out. It's popular in China, it's popular in Japan. It is the most popular form of Buddhism in Japan. We found it here in California as Nichiren Shoshu, or Soka Gakkai, which is a school that chants the Lotus Sutra. And their belief is, instead of saying Amida's name, you simply have to say the name of the Lotus Sutra. In Japanese helps, but you simply have to say that, and rebirth is possible. So these are entryways, and I'm probably not the ideal person to be talking to you about it. I have come around, but when I first came here and encountered Pureland, I was like, oh, please, that's Catholic. I'm a recovering, not Catholic, but close to. It's not, and it is. I also like Catholicism now too, though. So, you get older, you loosen up a little bit. The key to Pureland for me, and what made the change in how I felt about Pureland practice, was one of my Dharma sisters here, not a monk or a nun, every morning was up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and chanting for an hour, hour and a half, and incidentally ticking off the people who lived in the house. She had to learn to be quieter and quieter and quieter. But her practice, you could walk into the building and feel that there was practice going on. And I thought to myself, I may not understand all of the different ways of looking at Buddhism, all of the different ways of understanding spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, Buddha. But I can feel it with this person. She didn't know I was there. She wasn't doing it for my benefit. She was doing bodhisattva practice. She was chanting to Amitabha for the enlightenment of the world, that we all would pass into a Pure Land. And it changed how I look at it. And it meant that when I finally did meet Sri Ratanapriya, after hearing about him for years, I was able to talk to him without, my Buddhism is different from yours. I was able to just talk to him about what his Buddhism was. And not have to tell him what mine was at all. Just enjoy his faith. And Sri Ratanapriya used to chant that we would all make it to the Pure Land. And when I heard that he had passed on, the first thing that came to my mind was, he made it. And maybe he'll wait around for the rest of us. See you next Sunday, 11 o'clock. It'll be great fun.
Thank you. Do you have any question? So we have a little time to ask, 5 minutes.
No, I learned a lot. There's one point I didn't quite understand. You said when you chant for enlightenment, then the moment you think that you got somewhere, then you actually lost it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can you have a certain kind of intention and then, it seems contradictory. How can you actually, want to enter a certain state, but yet once you sort of maybe feel you've then okay, then you actually lost it. So I don't quite understand that.
Well, I've experienced the practical thing of one of the times that I was sitting in a zendo when it was snowing, and I could hear the snow hitting on the roof, and the me that was observing disappeared. I didn't go into, the most common thing is you go into a bliss state and everything's wonderful. You've missed it when you do that too. But I went into a moment of it felt like I felt the world. It felt like I was expanding, very much present, but I was conscious of, the kind of meditation that I do is an attempt to be aware of everything and not be attached to anything. And the moment I noticed that I was doing that, I became attached to it. I was like, oh my God, this is cool. And I lost it. It's not that it was bad, everything changes. Now the theory behind Buddhist meditation practice is that you train yourself. You train yourself like you would, I think of it as like I would train a dog. Kindly, but you train the dog that when you go in and you sit on the cushion, it's time to meditate. And your body, which is the dog, then goes, oh, that's what we're doing, okay. And like a dog, you become happy to do this, and it becomes easier. It's not as good as Amitabha's rule. So I also think of it as, on merry-go-rounds, there used to be a gold ring that would hang, and as the horse went up, you could reach for the gold ring. And the thing about the gold ring was that it was often just pot metal that had been painted gold. There was nothing there. My belief is that enlightenment and understanding is not pot metal painted gold, but I think the whole concept that we say up here about enlightenment or understanding, what we are doing is we're putting something ephemeral, something that you can't really grab, something that you can't talk about because it's beyond speech, it's beyond scriptures. We're putting up here, luring you. I know I was lured. When I first decided I was a Buddhist, it was like enlightenment. All right, that's what I'm going for. At the point where you can put down, I think I'm part of the way along in that when I sit down, I'm not sitting to become enlightened. I'm sitting because I'm sitting.
Okay, so it's not like driving where you have a certain kind of goal and then you drive and keep turning the wheel in order to get there.
I think of it in terms of you're going on vacation and you're going to Yosemite. You're going to go to Yosemite and you've decided how you're going to get there, but as you're driving you see a beautiful sunset and you pull over and you look at the sunset. It isn't that you're not ultimately going to get to Yosemite. You might not. You might die on the way. Something else might come up that's even better than Yosemite. I don't know what that would be, but something might come up. You might fall in love and everything's off the table. But when you become attached to a goal or a way of reaching that goal, and for me, the whole idea of Pureland is part of letting go of my way to becoming enlightened was I was going to sit on the cushion until I did it. I was going to be like Bodhidharma. I was going to rip off my eyelids. I was going to sit there till I lost my legs. I was going to sit there till I did it. Obviously, I'm not doing that. But at some point, I realized that it's more about the journey. And that attachment to that gold ring means that you're not going to enjoy going around and around and around. And that's really what's fun about, you look at the horse or whatever it is you're riding on, you feel the movement. So I don't know if that helps, but that's the thought behind it.
Is it just ultimately just being present?
All of these, for me, all of Buddhism are tools that help you be present. Because we think we're present, but then we find all these little accretions, all these little stickers, all these little things we're attached to, all these judgments that keep passing up of like, ooh, I'm present, lost it. So yes, but
Just not attaching
Even the
yourself
Buddha
to it.
couldn't do it, you know, so. If only we were able to be that focused.
Thank you.